Nobody expected it. A crowded charity gala, a well-known liberal journalist at the podium, and a young man quietly seated in the back. When the journalist's jokes turned personal, the room fell silent. The target? Barron Trump. What happened next left everyone in shock. His response wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was powerful. And it changed. The ballroom at the Fairmont Grand Hotel was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above rows of elegantly dressed attendees, their quiet hum of conversation adding to the grandeur of the annual charity gala. Among the crowd were some of the nation's most influential figures, business moguls, actors, and journalists, all gathered to support a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged youth. The air was alive with energy, yet an undercurrent of anticipation buzzed as the evening's keynote speaker prepared to take the stage. Seated toward the back in a less conspicuous corner was Barron Trump. At just 18 years old, his tall frame and stoic demeanor made him stand out, though not intentionally. He had been invited by a family friend, a quiet gesture meant to introduce him to a different circle. Unlike many attendees who thrived in the spotlight, Barron seemed content to observe, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with a calmness that belied his age. The gala had been moving along smoothly. A string quartet played softly in the background as waitstaff glided through the room, serving delicate hors d'oeuvres and champagne. Conversations were warm, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Yet, as the night progressed, it became clear that the highlight everyone was waiting for was the speech. The journalist, a celebrated figure in liberal media circles, had been announced weeks earlier as the evening's keynote speaker. Known for their sharp wit and unapologetic opinions, they were revered by some and criticized by others for their fiery rhetoric. Tonight, they promised to deliver an address that would challenge perspectives and ignite thought. As the MC introduced the journalist, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations quieted, glasses were set down, and all eyes turned to the stage. Barron, too, leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. The journalist stepped up to the podium, a confident smile spreading across their face. Dressed impeccably in a sleek black suit, they exuded charisma. The audience responded with polite applause, but there was an edge of expectation. Would they push boundaries tonight as they so often did? What no one anticipated was just how much. The journalists began with ease, their tone conversational and laced with charm. They joked about the city's infamous traffic and shared a lighthearted anecdote about a past gala mishap involving a toppled champagne tower. Laughter rippled through the audience, breaking some of the initial tension. For a moment, it felt like any other high-profile event, polished, predictable, and harmless. But soon, their tone shifted. What started as general commentary on politics and culture veered toward a more pointed critique. They referenced well-known political figures, poking fun at their quirks and missteps. Each jab drew chuckles and nods from parts of the crowd, but others exchanged glances, their smiles tightening. Then, the focus landed squarely on Donald Trump. "Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black," the journalist quipped, drawing scattered laughter. "Love him or hate him, you have to admit he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me." The crowd's response was mixed. Some laughed openly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Barron, sitting quietly at his table, remained still, his expression unreadable. If the journalists noticed his presence, they didn't let on, at least not yet. The jokes kept coming, each one sharper than the last. The journalist moved on to Trump's policies, his tweets, even his public appearances. The laughter began to thin out, replaced by a growing sense of unease among the attendees. But the journalist wasn't finished. "And of course," they said, pausing for effect, "we can't forget his most overlooked legacy, the next generation. I mean, let's talk about Barron." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Heads turned toward Barron, who sat motionless, his face now the center of attention. The journalist's tone remained playful, but the words carried a sting. "Imagine growing up in a golden tower surrounded by marble everything. And your dad tweeting about coffee while the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been character building. The attempt at humor fell flat. Some in the crowd chuckled nervously, but most sat in stunned silence. The spotlight of the moment, unasked for and unwelcome, had landed squarely on Barron. Instead of crumbling under the weight of the moment, Barron remained calm, his composure unshaken. The room seemed to hold its breath. All eyes were on him. The journalist's words lingered in the air, heavy and cutting. The crowd waited for his reaction, but Barron didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his chair or glance around nervously. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his expression calm but unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. The silence grew louder with each passing second. A few people exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable. Even the journalists seemed to notice the tension, their confident smirk faltering ever so slightly. Perhaps they had expected a laugh or even a dismissive shrug, anything but this quiet defiance. Barron's stillness wasn't born of indifference. It was something else entirely. His presence, understated yet commanding, seemed to grow as the moment stretched on. The journalists cleared their throat, attempting to regain control of the moment. "Tough crowd," they muttered into the microphone, forcing a laugh that no one echoed. The tension was thick, wrapping around the room like an invisible fog. And then Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed back his chair and stood. The soft scrape of the chair legs against the floor was the only sound in the room. At just over 6 feet tall, he was an imposing figure, his height matched by an aura of unexpected maturity. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on the journalist. Barron didn't need to speak, yet his presence alone commanded attention, silencing even the faint whispers at the back of the room. He stepped away from his table and walked toward the stage, each step measured, his posture straight and unwavering. The journalist froze, their earlier confidence evaporating as Barron approached. The crowd watched, their eyes wide with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. No one knew what he would say or do, but one thing was certain. This young man was about to own the moment. When Barron reached the edge of the stage and finally spoke, his words were nothing anyone could have anticipated. "Thank you for your insight," he began, his tone calm but firm. His choice of words caught the journalist and the audience off guard. There was no anger, no trace of indignation, only an eerie sense of control that seemed far beyond his years. "I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life. It's almost become a way to fill in the gaps when you don't know the full story. And I get it. We're public figures. It comes with the territory." A murmur broke the silence. The journalist visibly tensed. Barron's words weren't an attack, they were a mirror, reflecting back the weight of what had just occurred. Behind every headline, every punchline, there's a human being. Someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, their own story. He paused. Words have power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter. The room erupted into applause. The journalist stood frozen. And Barron? He simply returned to his seat, unaffected by the moment he had just owned. Barron returned to his seat as the applause filled the ballroom, a wave of sound that seemed to linger in the air longer than anyone had expected. At first it was hesitant, scattered claps from different corners of the room as people processed what had just happened. But then it grew, building into something undeniable, something powerful. The journalists stood frozen at the podium, their confident posture faltering as they watched the response unfold. Their expression shifted from surprise to something more difficult to define. Uncertainty, discomfort, perhaps even regret. The energy in the room had changed. Conversations that had been lighthearted only moments ago had taken on a different tone. People turned to one another, whispering in hushed voices, exchanging glances that held something unspoken. Some seemed impressed, others contemplative. But one thing was clear. No one had expected this. The moment had started as a joke, a casual remark meant to amuse, but it had turned into something else entirely. Barron, however, did not acknowledge the applause. He did not look around the room, did not react to the newfound attention. Instead, he simply picked up his glass of water and took a slow sip, as if nothing had changed at all. The quiet confidence with which he carried himself made the reaction even more profound. He had not asked for this moment, had not sought it out, yet he had taken control of it without effort. The journalist cleared their throat, attempting to regain some sense of authority over the room. "Well," they said, forcing a small chuckle, "I suppose we all just learned something about composure." The remark was met with scattered laughter, but it was strained, lacking the enthusiasm of earlier moments. The shift was unmistakable. The journalist, who had built a reputation on sharp words and pointed critiques, now found themselves in an unfamiliar position, on the receiving end of a moment that had slipped entirely out of their control. The evening continued, but the tension never quite dissipated. The guests, many of whom had attended countless events like this before, knew that what they had just witnessed was rare. It was not often that a speaker found themselves outmatched by silence. Not often that someone so young could turn an uncomfortable situation into a quiet victory. People who had never given much thought to Barron Trump now found themselves watching him with a different kind of interest. At a nearby table, a well-known political strategist leaned toward a colleague. "That wasn't just composure," he said, keeping his voice low. "That was control, and he didn't even have to say much to do it." Across the room, a journalist from another network typed furiously into their phone, drafting what would soon become one of the most shared tweets of the night. Tonight, Barron Trump gave a masterclass in handling public scrutiny. No theatrics, no anger, just presence. By the time the event concluded, the moment had already begun to spread beyond the ballroom. Attendees whispered about it on their way out, some replaying the moment in their minds, others already discussing how it would be covered in the media. Snippets of Barron's speech had been recorded, and within hours they had made their way onto social media. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok flooded with clips of his response, each post accumulating thousands of comments, many from people who had never before considered his voice worth listening to. Some users praised his maturity, calling it a defining moment for someone who had spent much of his life in the background of public attention. Others debated whether the journalist's remarks had been out of line, sparking a conversation about the ethics of targeting public figures' families. "Say what you want about his father," one post read, but Barron Trump just showed more class than half of Washington. News networks picked up the story the next morning, each with their own take on what had unfolded. Some framed it as a lesson in grace under pressure, others as an unexpected twist in an otherwise routine gala. The journalist at the center of the controversy released a statement, acknowledging that their joke had not landed as intended. "Comedy and commentary are important tools," they wrote, "but they should be used with care. Last night, Barron Trump handled himself with dignity, and for that, he has my respect." For most people, the moment became just another topic in the ever-changing cycle of public discourse, a story that would be discussed for a few days before something new took its place. But for Barron, it was just another evening. He had not gone to the gala seeking attention. He had not anticipated being part of the conversation at all. And yet, when the moment had come, he had responded in a way that made people take notice. The people who knew him best said he barely acknowledged the attention that followed. He continued with his daily routine, uninterested in the headlines or the online discussions. Those who reached out to him about the event found that he had little to say on the matter. To him, it had been a brief interaction, a moment that required nothing more than a measured response. But beyond the headlines and viral clips, beyond the debates and commentary, the moment left an impression. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response is not the loudest one. That dignity is not something that can be taken away, nor is it something that needs to be defended. It is something that exists within a person, steady and unwavering, regardless of the noise around them. As the days passed and the public moved on to other stories, the memory of that night lingered in the minds of those who had been there. They had expected an ordinary evening, another speech, another round of laughter at the expense of those in power, but instead, they had witnessed something far more compelling. A young man who had been thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight had met the moment with quiet strength. And in doing so, he had shown them all that true power is not found in words but in presence.